feature alert, the master API management, how to govern APIs with actionable insight. Myself, I'm Rajesh. I lead the integration practice at Aviva, and I have Sameer and Venkat here who will be walking us through this new feature alert. I'm personally excited to see what's in store, and since Dreamforce is around the corner, I'm sure there's a lot of things to be discussed and to be seen here. So, without further ado, I would hand it over to Sameer and Venkat, and we can get started from there. Sameer and Venkat, do you want to introduce yourself, and we can get started.
Sure. Thanks, Rajesh. Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to today's session. Excited to talk to you about what's coming up in the API governance product portfolio. Quick intro about me, Samir Purulkar. I lead our product marketing for our API management product portfolio, and I'm joined today by Venkat. Venkat, a quick intro.
Yes, thanks, Amir. Hi, everyone. Really good to meet you. I'm Venkat. I'm a product manager here at MuleSoft. I focus on some of the API management capabilities like governance and security and among other things. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so let's get started. And again, as with any of the Salesforce presentations, a quick forward-looking statement. We'll be talking about new products capabilities, but please make your purchasing decisions on the products available today. So with that, let's get started. Just wanted to provide everybody a quick context about what we're doing here. So again, API management is like if you look at overall MuleSoft product portfolio, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with, we group them into three key product groups, right? We have the integration product group, we have the API management product group, and then we have automation. So think about the way we group this capabilities as integration to connect all your applications and data to unlock your information, automation to automate your actions or processes, right? To improve efficiencies, set of product capabilities under that, and API management to govern and scale APIs, right? To manage and protect those APIs. So we kind of like group them into this category. So what we're going to talk about here is about API management products. And specifically for API management, I mean, we've been talking about universal API management, which is our vision for a couple of for more than a year now. But along with that, right, what we wanted to do was start a new series about mastering API management. And because there are different aspects to API management, right, all the way from protecting APIs to governing to sharing those APIs, managing, and many more, right? So we were like, okay, yeah, if that's the case, like we were excited to like start this API management series, right? We with different topics under that API management series to kind of like give you an overview of our product area, like what's coming, but also in the context about the key capabilities that we offer. So we did the API gateways session back in April, where we spoke about gateway, what's happening over there, Mule Gateway, Flex Gateway, Policy Development Kit, like how you can use that to protect some of the AI policies and much more like that, right? Today, what we're going to do is, which is what is today, is govern API. That's going to be the topic for today. And then stay tuned. We have more coming with the next, like I would say, like 3 months, right? We have the developer portal topic coming up on June 20th. We did engage and spoke with you all earlier, actually last year, about API Experience Hub, which is the new product that we launched. So you'll hear more about the developer portal on June 20th. Then we'll follow that with API Manager deep dive, which is kind of like our centralized control plane to manage and get more analytics on all your APIs, right? And then we'll follow that with more best practices for API catalog in August. So again, across the summer, spring to summer, lots of different topics, and really excited to bring those, like me, Sue, Venkat, and the product team to talk to you about that. So that's kind of like a high level what we will be doing and showcasing. One of the things that we wanted to do specifically today was talk about governance, right? API governance. API governance, and again, Venkat is going to go a bit more deep dive into API governance, like the product what the value is, as well as the new feature that we will be launching soon. So I'm not going to talk about it. I want Venkat to talk about that like in few minutes. But what I'll do is I'll set the context about how does governance like work in terms of the overall what we talk about API management, and something that we getting a lot of input from customers like you, our partners, and we're seeing that the topic of governance is becoming increasingly important today. And we'll talk about it. Like I'll set that stage, then Venkat will kind of like walk you through the product updates. And please, we want this to be much more interactive. So once we're done with the session, if you have any questions, please let us know about it. Okay. All right. So let's get started. So we one of the things that I know we speak about this quite a lot in the market about this concept about like universal API management, right? But why is universal API management important, and what do we mean by that, right? And what it kind of like really relates, high level relates to, is this challenge that we see is happening, and we see this actually much more happening. This term called API sprawl or API proliferation, and what exactly is that, right? Again, a couple of years back, I think four plus years back, MuleSoft touted this whole concept about API-led connectivity, right? And with great success in the market. And a lot of our customers used APIs to develop connected solutions, right? And use the capabilities within the product to protect those APIs, right? Using API Manager, using Mule Gateway to protect those Mule APIs, and got a really incredible value using that. So again, the API design philosophy, API design first approach to do that, right? And again, with great success. But what we've seen is that from a customer's perspective, their API use cases actually go beyond just MuleSoft, right? And it happens all the time, right? For example, as your LOB applications, as your LOBs are developing new applications to support their business initiatives, right? Oftentimes they use technologies directly from the cloud to create their APIs, right? Again, you use the API-led approach, but you're using APIs using different technologies. Some customers are adopting microservices, DevOps. They're developing APIs to support them. When you talk about event-driven, you have APIs that you develop to now support those event-driven applications or event-driven use cases, right? And today, with the with essentially the adoption of AI, with what we're seeing in the market, with so much kind of like trend of using AI within I know a lot of IT organizations are still trying to figure out like how they can actually incorporate AI within their environment, right? But another aspect about AI also is that APIs again become very important to interact with those AI, right? APIs are becoming actually, APIs are still the most common way by which you can interface with AI programmatically, right? I'm not talking about just Gen AI. Gen AI is more conversational. Okay, you type something and you get a response back. But when you want to now incorporate that as part of your overall interactions, automatic interaction, you need a way by which you can actually use APIs with that, right? So as we see that, right, all these APIs are now developed using different set of technologies, different set of deployment models, right? It could be cloud, it could be on-premise, or it could be hybrid setting, right? And what happens because of this is one key challenge that I think everybody's facing is that they have limited visibility and access to these existing APIs, right? Like, where are all these APIs? There's an inconsistent enforcement of security and governance. This is becoming even more important today, right? And complex operations and troubleshooting. Data point from Gartner, like by 2025, which is like just next year, right? For more than 50% of APIs are going to go unmanaged, right? Leaving really a bit security vulnerability in your environment. So this is where universal API management, our vision of universal API management, backed by a product capabilities, it will help you now control that API sprawl. And what universal API management is a set of capabilities across the API lifecycle, from building your APIs to discovering, to governing, to managing, to engaging, right? So discover, build, and catalog any API, right? Using different standards, async API, RAML, or OAS, discovering non-Mule APIs and bringing them into one place, exchange for a single source of truth for your APIs, governing those APIs, whether they are mule or non-mule APIs, managing and protecting those APIs, whether they're mule or non-mule, and then engaging and creating portals for sharing of those APIs, right? So today we will be talking about governance capability, again, part of the overall universal API management, right? And that's the capability that we're going to focus on today. And if you think about this, right, when you map this holistic universal API management approach, and when you map it to the full API lifecycle capability, and we have a set of product capabilities across this API lifecycle. For example, as you're now developing and building your APIs, right? So products like Anypoint Studio, which you're all very familiar with, Anypoint Code Builder, which is a recent, like more modern development environment that we just launched last year. We're seeing great traction in the market. We see that, get a lot of feedback from you all about your excitement about the product, and then adoption of it, about implementing those APIs, right? Developing those APIs, developing those connectivities, orchestrating those interactions, and design center to now design your APIs, mocking your APIs, governance, API governance. Again, we'll talk about this now. Conformance checks, exchange is a single source of truth, like a catalog of all your APIs, automations or integrations, API experience up to now, share those APIs, monitoring of those APIs, API manager to protect this using different gateway options like Mule Gateway or Flex Gateway. And again, runtime manager to now deploy those gateways, deploy your Mule applications across your hybrid landscape, on-premise or in the cloud. So with that, right, I'm going to hand it over to now Venkat to now walk you through, actually maybe a slide after this, right? So then the idea is, like, if that's the right, so where does API governance fit in this overall life cycle, right? And why is it important, right? I gave that example earlier about the kind of like how APIs are being used, right? So if you look at today's environment, you have APIs that are developed to deliver digital services, deliver on your business applications, and now for AI services, right? So now as more and more of these APIs are developed across your environment, across your landscape, it's becoming increasingly more important that you have more visibility into where these APIs are, and making sure that the APIs actually conform to those best practices or standards. Why is this important? If you look at a lot of the API vulnerability issues that have happened recently, oftentimes that vulnerability is just because of like an API that was just unprotected, right? It was there, but the customer didn't actually know about that API, and it could be, and not that these things become intentional. Sometimes they're very inadvertent, right? This API was developed to kind of like return customer information, but just because it was through a testing phase and it was just released in production inadvertently, but then that one thing can now lead to a big security vulnerability and data leak issues, right? So how do you really prevent this? This is where API governance comes in, right? Where you can now consistently apply governance or best practices into all the APIs that you have, right? Catalog all the APIs into one place using CI/CD. Define the best practices so that as a team, as a security team, as an architect, as a developer team, you can actually define, okay, these are the set of best practices that we want to follow. Then as your developers are actually designing those APIs, intuitively they actually get notification, like they're guided that whether your API is conforming to the price or it is not. Then as part of an ongoing, your security teams as well as developers actually get conformance dashboards to now really look into the holistically look at the overall conformance of an API, right? Are they conforming, are they not? What are the standard they should be adhering to, and allowing you as a developer to then fix it much more interactively, right? So it's about the developers and security teams working together to provide that solution. So that's what is the importance of API governance. So I'm going to hand it over now to Venkat to give more of a deep dive into Anypoint governance. And Venkat, I can forward the slides.
Wonderful. Thanks, Samir. Let's talk a bit more about governance, just double click into it. So Samir talked about how governance helps architects and security teams while enabling developers to improve improve API posture and make sure they follow the best practices. The way governance does that is by providing this fully operational or always on assessment of API, so that you don't have to manually review APIs after they are created. Rather, as APIs are created, as they're updated, governance will give you a way to continuously assess APIs and tell you what might be wrong. And we'll talk about that a bit more in a bit, but you can do that at design time as you're developing your APIs, or after APIs are developed. So governance gives you the flexibility to deploy and assess APIs in the framework that you best fits your organization. And the second thing I wanted to call out is, again, reiterate what Samir just mentioned, is governance a frictionless experience, right? Where your developers are able to improve APIs while maintaining speed of delivering APIs. And they can do that bringing governance to the tools that developers are already using to build APIs, like Design Center, or very soon we'll talk about Code Builder, or bring governance to the CI/CD if that's the preferred mechanism interface with developers. And then last thing, we'll touch upon this a bit more. Governance is not just a design spec evaluation solution. It's a way for you to assess your entire API, look at your specs and see how it adheres to or doesn't adhere to standards and best practices and naming guidelines, but also your gateway configurations and what policies are applied and should be applied, and what is missing, and so on. So that's in a gist what governance is. Let's double click into it a little bit more. So as I was talking about a bit ago, governance of an API is not just assessing an OAS or a YAML specification. We believe API is made of a number of different components, or what we call aspects of an API, where specifications of an API is just one design component of an API, but you also have the instances, which is the gateway configurations and the policies, or the catalog metadata itself that defines what that API is. That includes things like description of that API, or the name of that API itself, as how consumers see it, or also the documentation, the human readable docs that of that API need to understand what this API does, and other more aspects of it. And then the key thing that I wanted to highlight as part of what makes an API, and I know in the chat already, Edgar had asked a question about implementation, the Mule implementation. We see an API is made of the Mule implementation as well. That's what we want to do as part of governance. Give you a way to assess the entire API, not just the API spec. And so far this year, now we already have governance of a lot of these aspects of an API. And later this year, we will add other capabilities like governance of implementation. Samir, if you want to go to the slide next. Thank you. So as we do that, as we think about governance of APIs, of entire API, one way for you to think about governance is how can you use this comprehensiveness of assessment of API across entire life cycle of API, be it at design and build phase when you are designing an API in Design Center or Code Builder. How do you apply some of the design best practices and OAS best practices or Open API best practices? And similarly, how do you, when you publish or catalog that API in any point in Exchange, how do you assess that API for cataloging best practices or documentation best practices? Similarly, when you start managing that API and protecting that API with a gateway, what sort of policy best practices or security best practices do you want to look for? Lastly, again, this might be, but when you publish this to a portal, how do you evaluate that API for best practices for how it's exposed to your end users or partners or other developers in the organization, of course. So we want to make sure that governance is not just evaluating all parts of an API, but it's useful to you, and you can apply this at different stages of an API lifecycle. While governance has all of these out-of-the-box rules that you can just use to get started quickly, you can also build custom rules, because we know that every customers, I'm sure you are probably thinking about this yourself right now, that while MuleSoft can provide some of these rules based on our point of view on what our customers need, every organization's rules and checklists or review practices or audit practices are going to be different. That's where governance gives you a way to customize rule sets. And there are some tooling as well for that. So next slide, Samir. So with that, I just wanted to, I think I'd already touched upon this, but very quickly, some of the end-to-end governance, we added those capabilities in the last 4 to 6 months. Things like governing your policies in the gateway, or what we call instances, and some documentation and cataloging best practices as well. Those are things that we've added recently, and we'll continue to add more capabilities to make governance end-to-end. And one of those is implementation. And the other thing that we also is more reporting, because governance is, while validating and assessing an API is one part of the value that you get from governance, but the value is not fulfilled until there is certain visibility governance can provide to the developer or to the architects or to the security folks. And that's where we continue to, the second pillar that we continue to focus on is reporting. How do we provide more enhanced reports and dashboards to give you a better way to understand your governance posture? So we added that recently, and we'll continue to do more, and we'll talk about that next. Sorry. So with that, a quick look at a roadmap. Again, as Samir mentioned earlier, all of this is subject to our overall MuleSoft and Salesforce disclaimer. But our roadmap is geared or aligned on 4 main themes. And first one, and probably the most important thing for us, is continuing to invest in governance to make it more comprehensive. I talked about governing implementation, which is the Mule app itself, and other aspects of the SLA tiers and the contracts that you create in any point in API Manager. So governance of all of continue to do that. And of course, it's not just about governing the depth of an API, but governing more types of APIs. So today, of course, governance supports REST APIs and GraphQL APIs. Sorry, I should take it back. REST APIs and async APIs. We will add support for HTTP and newer versions of async as well. And of course, when we add more implementation support and SLA tier support, we will bolster that with more out-of-the-box rules as well. And the second theme here, again, we'll double-click into this up right next, giving you understanding of your API posture. We'll talk about this in a bit more detail, and making it more extensible, giving you tooling to write your own rules and not just be content with what MuleSoft provides out of the box. And then lastly, the more delightful experience to use governance in your organization, things like audit logging and better integration with CLI, and so on. That's the gist of the roadmap. Happy to talk about more of this in the Q&A. But let's double click into one of these, the insights. And there was a question earlier about this as well. Today, within any point, you will probably see insights being surfaced in multiple places. Right? One of the challenges with a platform like Anypoint is there are so many pieces of assets that you are building in Anypoint. You have your specs, you have your instances, you have your apps running on a runtime manager. With governance, we have this foundational framework for how we connect all these different assets. As was explained ago, for us, an API is just an API spec. It's an API spec which is attached to multiple instances deployed across multiple environments and multiple apps running in runtime manager, again, multiple environments. With API insights, we want to give you the visibility out of the box, even when you're not using governance or API manager or any of the other capabilities in any point. As long as you are able to use any point to catalog your API Insights, will give you another out of the box dashboard that tells you a basic or gives you a basic understanding of your API program. That shows how well you are using any point and how well you are progressing in your API program and your API strategy, indicating things like how many APIs do you have, and how many of them are managed, how many of them are implemented in Runtime Manager, how many of them are secured with the right policies, and more importantly, enabling you to take actions where you can use Insights dashboards to take action on those unmanaged APIs. Or if you know that there are finite APIs that are missing documentation, you'll be able to see what those APIs are and address that. So this Insights dashboard is a way for you to improve your API program posture as the moment you are using any point. So that's something that we are working on already and hope to launch sometime in Q3 or second half of this year. Samir? So in addition to that, let's, now that we talked about some of the roadmap items and what we are working on and so on, let's talk for next couple of minutes about a customer example of how a real customer is using governance as part of their organization. And this is one of a leading banking who had this problem where they're a large enterprise who's using MuleSoft to build a lot of their APIs. But at the same time, there are different parts of the organization in various capacities use multiple API management platforms, right? And there are so many non-Mule APIs as well. So that creates this lack of central governance. And that's a challenge that Samir talked about earlier. And what that means is, because of the lack of central governance, there wasn't this ability to commercialize APIs. APIs are in all these different places. How do you drive reuse and productize those APIs from one place? It's harder to do if all these APIs are in different places. And then the second problem is, if these APIs are being built in different platforms by different teams, it's very hard to maintain this single consistent APIs or practice for APIs, thereby affecting the overall brand, especially when it's exposed to your partners or users. And that's where this customer came up with a solution to build a single high quality API catalog of all APIs, Mule and non-Mule APIs, and use governance to improve quality and consistency of APIs, and use our developer portals to build a single marketplace of all those APIs. So let's talk about this in a little more detail. We go to the next slide, Samir. So the initial challenge this customer had was as I was saying, there is these endless number of APIs. Think of this as a conveyor belt of APIs that keep piling up, right? And on the right, though, the challenge is, how do you start cataloging these APIs in a structured form? Start building some structure to these APIs, and it's not just random APIs falling through, but these are APIs that are cataloged in the right manner in any point exchange that brings certain order to these APIs. And the step 2 of this next slide is, now to do this, of course, the first step, they were able to have all these APIs flow through the API catalog CLI. The second step is, how do you bring governance to that mix? That's where they used governance CLI, which is integrated with, of course, Anypoint CLI, to integrate in their own CI/CD pipelines. Where step 1 within this governance enablement is building custom rules that adhere to for their own. Step 2, integrate CLI in their CI/CD at just before the publish time. And while that allowed them to evaluate APIs in the CI/CD and give developers the feedback at that time and enforce governance at the time. But central reporting of governance validations is very critical as well. That's where they build a central what profile for central reporting of all violations and the current posture. And lastly, when the API meets certain criteria, they were able to publish those APIs into Anypoint Exchange for further continuous monitoring. So once the governance was integrated, now they are beginning to start building a catalog, because previously they had this basic API catalog where there are APIs are built, but it's not. There are a couple of categories, but it's not well documented, or doesn't have the right tagging mechanism to group and classify APIs. That's where on the right they were able to use governance to improve the catalog posture, where the APIs that are now added to the catalog are first of all following the right APIs specification best practices. They have the right tagging mechanism, because governance can now evaluate tags and identify APIs that don't have the right tags, or identify APIs that don't have the right documentation. So they were able to automate all of those aspects of building that catalog. Now, this catalog is a more enhanced of the API catalog, because across the different dimensions of a spec, documentation, and the catalog metadata, they have a much more standardized version, irrespective of where this API is being built. And the last step in this whole process is, once they have this enhanced catalog, it's just a matter of publishing this from this API to this developer portal, publishing catalog to the marketplace portal, and when there are changes happening in the marketplace port or API in the marketplace, it is reflected back in your catalog as well. So that's the whole end-to-end journey that this customer was able to enable, using the several capabilities in Anypoint, being API catalog CLI, using governance, and using Exchange and developer portals. So that's the end-to-end experience we want to drive further. Now, to sum it up, all of this, like we talked about the governance, how it helps developers, architects, and security professionals. And we saw how one of the customers used governance, not just for Mule APIs, but for any API, and use it end-to-end. I wanted to leave with a couple of things. One, you can use API governance for this API that you're building in Anypoint, and start using governance at design time. So when you're using governance, when you're creating a new API in Design Center, and very soon in Code Builder, you'll have the same experience. All the governance rules are validating your APIs as you're designing the API, helping Alex build or design the APIs right the first time. Right? And when those APIs are developed, they flow through the same pipeline that we talked about. APIs are developed, they flow through the CLI and are validated again before they are published to the marketplace. This is what API that you want to insert or integrate governance at design time. Now, what if you're not using MuleSoft for these APIs? What if Alex was not using MuleSoft for building this API? That's where governance CLI comes in, where Alex can still use governance as part of their whole development cycle, where they build APIs, and as soon as they build APIs in any design tool or editor that they use, and publish those APIs into the Anypoint catalog, and again, there is validation happening in the catalog. So with this, you can take governance and bring it to Alex, to the developer tools that Alex is already using, as opposed to forcing them to come to the single design center in Anypoint. So that's the benefit of using governance for Mule as well as non-Mule APIs. It depends on your organization's needs. So that's what we have for governance. I think with the next slide, maybe Samir, do you want to take it over and talk about?
Samir, we'll
Yeah.
take a few questions.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
more interactive. Yeah.
We will. Be right. So I wanted to just close it out. So, right, thanks, Venkat, for that deep dive into API governance. And just to set the context, right, what we walked through was um, API governance as a product, the new feature that's coming, API Insight. Sorry, we couldn't have a demo that we wanted to show today. There's some we're having some difficulties, but what we'll do is we'll once we have something, we'll definitely share it with the community as a early preview of that. But then another concept that I think is really important to highlight is one is the feature, which is the product feature. But the other one, what Venkat actually walked through was how one of our customers actually using governance, right? And we see different variations of it. And that's really where the value is, right? Because it's not just governance, right? It's not just catalog, but how can you actually use this catalog as part of the overall development life cycle, right? So that your end goal, like in this particular customer's use case, was to have high quality APIs that could now be shared and published to their portals so that they can use internally within their developer community, but most importantly also sharing those APIs with their external partners or suppliers so that they can have those digital services or new ecosystems as part of their workflow, right? But to do that, the quality of that API was very important for them, right? And that actually in turn drove. So that was number one. And number two was didn't really have any idea about where all those APIs, right? And where all those APIs, because one always important aspect is the reusability of those APIs. But if they don't know where they are, then how are they going to reuse them, right? And this is where they took that entire approach of yes, governance as a central pillar, but more than governance, like okay, how can we catalog them, put them as part of a development life cycle, improve governance continuously, but now apply that to all my mule APIs, but also my non-mule APIs, right? And this is where that concept about universal API management becomes important, right? This is how we can actually now govern and control your API sprawl. So that was kind of like a quick overview of that. So again, we have more information. We will just like we also have a demo of overall API management, which Sue created like around like a month or two back, where we actually walk you through each of this set of capabilities with a quick 5 to 6 minute demo, and the code is also available. So it's easy for you to then like really highly like identify like how you can actually incorporate this within your environment, right? So I'll kind of like walk through that. Again, as I said, there's a we do have another session coming up end of June about API developer portals, so stay tuned for that. Um, I think what we can do next is let's take some quick questions, Venkat. I know I saw that there were a couple of questions that
Yeah.
came in.
Yes,
Yeah.
Samir. So let's start with, I think, the first question from Sid. It's just a quick question. Does MuleSoft has a standalone APIM capabilities?
Yes, we do, right? I mean, look, this capabilities that we have, like all the way from um, Flex Gateway to protect your APIs, API governance, which is what we demonstrated today, and also the API Manager as well as API Experience Hub. All of this set of capabilities can be just like you can get them by itself, right? So we do provide those standalone API capabilities.
Okay, thanks. We have second question from Pankaj. So what are the impact of applying additional API policy for securing the API endpoint? How we can mitigate those risks?
I can probably take that, Samir. Um, I don't know when you Pankaj, when you say risk, what type of risk you are thinking about, but there aren't any challenges with applying gateway policies, additional gateway policies um, on your API. That depending on the type of policy and how heavyweight that policy is, that might result in certain increase in lead times or throughput times for your API or response times for API. But other than that, I don't see any risks of applying additional policies to an API. Maybe I'm misunderstanding that
Yeah.
question, right? Yeah, performance impacts are critical. I think especially when you use newer gateways, gateways, for example, they are designed for this purpose, where you can run a large number of APIs on a gateway with a large number of sophisticated policies with very minimal performance impact. And that's what our benchmark indicates. So our gateways are designed for those use cases. But if you see certain challenges with it, we definitely want to know more about it.
Sure. Thanks, Venkat.
And we just before we move to the next question, actually, with respect to that, we actually have a benchmarking guide for Flex Gateway that was published like around a year back. So some of the data might be older, but take a look at it.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Sure, Samir. Thanks. So we have next question from, sorry, if I'm spelling your name wrong. Was it sick? So will there be something similar to SonarQube that would check for the rules in API implementation code?
Our goal with the implementation or governance of Mule implementation is something similar. Our goal to begin with is to this year is to start evaluating the Mule config and identify what are the best practices there, or depending on, like, I need to look at what libraries it might be using and find the vulnerable libraries and so on. And maybe in the second part of what we want to do there is also, even if it is not MVP, but shortly after MVP, is not just evaluate the Mule implementation in the Mule config, but also help you kind of create that link between this is the Mule app and this is the corresponding API instance. And when you have a Mule app without a right set of protection policies, that might be a red flag. So identify those sort of scenarios where to ensure that you have the right posture for your API. It's not just the Mule implementation that matters, but you have specifications for this API and the right gateway policies for that API. So if you are looking for something specific for SonarQube, definitely interested in getting the feedback. But our intention is for you to have the ability to evaluate the Mule XML.
Okay, thanks, Venkat. So we have one question from Sagnik Adhikari. I think the addition of custom governance rule sets via AMF framework is still quite cumbersome. Any thoughts of making it more usable or having more robust and transparent documentation on AMF and getting started intuitive guides on that?
Yes, for sure. So what you will see us doing the second half of the year is a couple of things. I don't know if Sagnik, you are aware of the rule set development CLI that is kind of more open source. It's not a feature of governance yet, but we have made a rule set CLI available. That's right now we are gathering feedback on how well that rule set development CLI is working. But that rule set development CLI aids you create more custom rules more easily rather than going directly working with AMF. So that's number one. We are looking for that feedback. So maybe, Samir, if there is a way we can share that rule set development CLI after this call with this group. That is one. The second thing is, based on that feedback, our intention in second half of this year, I may have an item in a roadmap for rule set development CLI that we do want to make available as a first-class citizen for all our customers as well as a feature of governance. And as part of that, not only will you have a rule set development CLI, but you'll also have documentation for most common of rules. For example, one of the things that's very common that our customers ask for is we have our rule sets, and some of these rule sets have hundreds of rules, and customers want to start with just one rule. And it's very simple to disable one rule in an API. You can do that in text editor. So there are some simple cases like that we want to document and help you get started with that very easily. So there will be additional documentation for that. And then there are, of course, more sophisticated cases where you want to write a rule from scratch. And our rule set development CLI already provides a tutorial for that, but we will improve the tutorial when we make that a feature of governance. So maybe we'll take an after this call, if there is the rules set development CLI with all of you, we'll do that. And certainly feel free to give us feedback.
Sure. So I think that's all we have for questions. Just to everyone, we will be publishing this on our YouTube channel, so please make sure you follow. So I'll work with Samir to get the URL and publish the URL as well for the rule set.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And just one additional thing. So again, everybody, thanks for your time today. Hopefully, this information was useful to you all. Again, we'll share with you the demo of upcoming API Insight, as well as the CLI update that Venkat was saying. We'll share all of this information. But in addition, like we really want to know more about API management stories from you, like the use case stories in your environment, what you're seeing, either whether if you're implementing or whether you're actually doing this today within your environment. We want to know them. We want to actually know them. We want to feature them, either blogs or through many other means, like through events. So please, you can do. There is a form that we have just created to capture your use case stories. Again, tell us, like, I mean, totally up to you. If you don't want it to be more public, that's perfectly fine. We'll figure out a way by which can share it much more internally within the community also. Totally fine with that. But they're really looking for some of the great stories, like how we shared today about the API governance. We would like to know more from you all, right? So that's what is the main intention. So that was like my main thing I wanted to close out on. But that's it.
thanks, Amit. We are already receiving great feedback of the session, so I'm glad we were able to host this and talk about the governance, and not just for Mule API but non-Mule APIs as well. This is really informative and a lot of insight. I'm looking forward for the next session we will have. So thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. As I said, we will publish this on our YouTube channel with all the links and any additional details you need. Thank you, Venkat. Thanks, Amir.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.